There's a lot going on here today. First, I want to show you a new way to create gorgeous, colorful mandala designs with stencils. Second, it's July 1st, so I'm starting my annual Christmas in July feature. And third, it's Canada Day, so I'm in an annual video hop with a ton of prizes and giveaways. We better get started. First, let's talk about the hop. Today's video is part of the third annual Canada Day video hop, where a bunch of Canadian card makers are focusing on Canadian design products and shops. We've got over $1,000 in prizes from our very generous sponsors, and the more comments you leave as you hop along, the better your chance of winning. Winners will be announced on Friday, July 22nd. All the hop details are in the description below. There's also discount codes for several of the Canadian shops, and I've put those down below as well. Next, let's talk a little bit about these Mandala Stencils. These round stencils are designed to work with the Stencils 360 tool by Penguin Palace Stamps. They've given us a discount code to share with you for a limited time. If you're new to this tool, I've got a whole playlist showing you basic and not so basic techniques that you can use with it, and I'll do a brief recap today. One of the things about these stencils is that you can't always tell what the design's going to look like just by looking at them, because to create the design you have to turn the stencil. So that's what I did. I created a sample that I can put in the back of my stencil pocket so I can easily see how the design looks, where the various colors would go so that I can plan my next card. This Centerpiece Stencil is a lovely floral pattern that you can ink up with no masking at all. These designs tend to be larger than a card panel, and I've cut them down with a 5 1/4 inch circle die just for storage purposes, but you can see how this could fit onto an A2 card front if I hold up a large rectangle die or even a square die. Next is the Plaid Floral Fun. This comes with two stencils, a 4-inch stencil that makes a smaller design, and then this larger plaid petal design that's 8 inches. When you combine them, here's the look you get. Next is the Fancy Gift Bow. This set has 3 stencils. I've started labeling my stencils so I can remember which set they go with, since I've been having fun mixing and matching, but now I'm getting ahead of myself. The largest stencil is 8 inches and you can get this big diamond flower. You can see how it could fit onto an A2 card. You also get a smaller version of the same design so you can make smaller diamond flowers. You get this 8-inch design and you get this clear stencil, which is something new. Clear stencils mean that they don't have to be turned. The full design is right on it. I put that one in the center of this sample, and then the 8-inch design is the pink on the outside of this sample, which is a really fun geometric look. Finally, this is the Mandalas Set. It comes with 8 pieces. There are 3 8-inch stencils, and here are my samples for each one. Because each shape on the stencil is far apart from the others, you don't have to mask anything when you want to add more than one color. And I did a full rainbow sample for this one. Here's the second sample, and I used one of the clear stencils included in the set as the center. And here's the third mandala with that same center. Next, you get this 6-inch design that looks like this. Just the outside pattern. That inside pattern is another clear center stencil design. And you get these 2 little designs that look like daisies. And of course you can get different looks by using different elements. Here's an example where I just used one element, but I turned it 24 times instead of 8. I'm sure there's math that would determine exactly how many possible combinations there are, but I don't know it, so I'm just going to say there's a lot. Okay, so let's get started. My color combination today is Party Dress, Drive-In, and Flirty Fuschia, which is not really a traditionally Christmas color palette, but wait until you see how pretty it is. I've got my Stencils 360 base on my work surface, and I'm placing my A2 panel paper guide inside the base. To be honest, I don't always use this, but its purpose is to help center your cardstock before you start stenciling your design. I'm starting with an 8-inch stencil, so I have my 8-inch stencil guide out, and I'm positioning that so that the arrow is at the top and facing the 12 o'clock position on the base. Then I tape my stencil in place with the element I want pointing up toward that 12 o'clock. I keep the extra tape right here on the base so I can reuse it until it's lost all its stick. Because the areas I'm blending are small, I've got these mini blenders from Altenew that I'll be using for all my cards. These mandala stencils are designed to be 8-pointed mandalas, but I want to make snowflakes with them, so I want 6 points. I can see from the label at the top of the base that means I need to turn my stencil to point at every other circle painted on the base to get the correct angles. Again, if you haven't seen this tool in action, I've got more detailed instructions in my playlist, which I've linked below. So now I'm just going to blend my ink through the element I want to use on my snowflakes. I'm using all 3 colors to get a gradient look that really adds a lot to these designs. Okay, now I'm ready for my first turn. I line up the arrow on my stencil guide with the solid black circle, and without doing any math at all, my design has turned exactly 60 degrees. So I continue on, blending and turning to the next black circle. I try to remember to clean the stencil each time before I turn, just so that I'm not blending that dark drive-in ink into my fuchsia. But honestly, I'm not that good at remembering, so I really ended up with a variety of color blends. When I've finished all 6, you can see the pretty blends, and you can see that my snowflake is coming to life. I want to use one of the other elements on this stencil to fill in my snowflake a bit, but it wasn't in the position I needed, so I couldn't blend both shapes at once. So I'm replacing the stencil, this time lining up that other element I want in the place I want it, between 2 of the 6 points I've already blended. I've still got that arrow pointing to 12 o'clock, and that's important to make it easy to know where to turn the stencil to. Once it's lined up, it's easy. Just blend and turn, blend and turn, blend and turn, until all 6 shapes are done. This is pretty, right? I'll show you all my finished cards at the end, but here's how the panel looks. Okay, snowflake 2. I place my paper guide in again, center my paper, and then grab the 8-inch stencil ring and the mandala stencil I'm using. I line up the element I'll be blending with the arrow at 12 o'clock and tape the stencil in place. I start blending, and then I turn to the black dot and blend again. We've seen this before. But for my center this time, I'm going to use one of the clear stencils that doesn't require any turning. This one is 6 inches, so I place the 6-inch guide into my base, and then I place my stencil in. Now, if your eye is good, you don't even need the base for this one, since you won't be turning it at all. You can just place it in the center of your design and blend your inks through. The stencil guide in this case just gives you absolute precision about centering that design on the cardstock. And it's worth noting that because the center stencil is a 6-pointed design, it could be a snowflake on its own if you wanted. And now snowflake 3. I use that same outer element as snowflake 2, and this time to fill it out, I'm using that 6-inch design. Now I do the same thing. I grab the 6-inch stencil guide, line up the design where I want it, tape it, and start blending ink through. Because this design has 2 pieces that are opposite to each other, I only have to turn the stencil 3 times to get 6 of the designs. This fills this snowflake in a completely different way, but it's a really pretty look. So pretty that I got distracted for a moment, and I thought this design would make a really pretty wreath. So I changed colors for a minute, and I blended the design first with Martini, which is a bright yellow green, and then I shifted the stencil 30 degrees so it would be offset and each design would be centered between the previous designs. Then I blended Deck the Halls ink, which is a deep foresty green. I ended up with this almost Nordic looking geometric wreath pattern that I think is really fun. Okay, now back to our regularly scheduled programming. This time I put my cardstock down without the paper guide. By now I can tell from experience and the grid on my work surface pretty much where it needs to go. This time I'm using that larger stencil from the fancy gift bow set to make a 6-pointed star. I started by masking off the outside portion of the design. I could have left it on to fill in more of the panel, but it's an easy way to get a clean, definite edge to the design. This is another of the stencils with 2 of the same design, so I only needed to do 3 turns to get everything filled in. I love the energy that seems to radiate along those white lines in the design. Finally, I'm making a card with multiple snowflakes. This is the most complex technique because it involves moving the cardstock to place the snowflakes all over the panel. The stencil will always be in the center of the base, so I use a trial and error method to figure out where I want the snowflake to be. I'm using that 6-pointed stencil from the Plaid Flower Fun set, and I'm doing one heavier blend through before turning it 30 degrees and doing a much lighter blend through to almost give the snowflake a layered look. Now while it's still in place, I grabbed the smaller design from the fancy gift bow set. I positioned it so that the 2 shapes were over top of my darker snowflake arms, and I blended the ink through really lightly. Then I turned to the next darker arms and blended again until everything was filled in. Then I trialed and errored my way to the position of my next snowflake and repeated the 3-step process. Heavier blending through the first stencil, then lighter blending, and finally that top layer with the second stencil. Then I positioned the final snowflake, trying to form a visual triangle of the 3 and leaving space for a sentiment. I liked it, but I felt like it needed a little more, so I hunted through all those center stencils to find something appropriate. I grabbed this clear stencil that looks a little bit like a snowflake, even though it has 8 arms, and I blended super light ink through several times, just using the residual ink on my brushes. I didn't even use the stencil guide this time. Since I wasn't turning the stencil, I didn't need to use the guide to keep it centered. To finish the cards, I cut all my designs down to 4-inch square panels. 4¼ inch square cards are my favorite format, but of course any of these designs would work with A2 size cards. I used some Essential Circles dies with frames to cut negative frames from a couple where I wanted to add emphasis to that center area. I also splattered them all with some Avery Elle clear shimmer spray for a frosty look. Then it was time to think about sentiments. I used the magical Christmas sentiment set from Penguin Palace, and it has a few standalone sentiments along with this one big stamp that creates a bunch of strip-size sentiments all at once. I used some anti-static powder on my black cardstock, and then I stamped it with my Misty and Wow embossing ink, stamping twice to be sure I got a really good impression. I poured opaque bright white embossing powder over top and then heated it with my heat gun in my foil-lined lid. This lid keeps my fingers away from the paper as the powder is being melted, and the foil helps to reflect heat back to the paper, reducing warping. After it was cool, I used a fluffy brush to get rid of any excess powder, and then I used the 2 boxes on the cardstock to line up my die perfectly. I taped it down to prevent shifting and then ran it through my die cutting machine. Then I ran the die through again, this time with some scrap white cardstock, so that I could have strips the exact same width to build up some dimension behind my black sentiment strips. There's a lot of sentiments here, but you don't have to use the full sentiment each time, and you don't have to keep them as one strip either. For this card, I trimmed down Merry Christmas to You to just Merry Christmas. I added some African violet gems from Crafty Meraki to all my cards. These have a pinky, purpley sparkle that is the perfect complement to my color palette. Card number 2 got the full joy, peace, and love sentiment. Snowflake 3 got probably the most appropriate sentiment in the set, "'Tis the season to sparkle." This time I cut it up to better use that white space in the center of this open design. And here's that 6-pointed white star. For this one I used my favorite sentiment from this set, nesting it perfectly in all that white space. Next, my little blizzard design, and another bigger sentiment from the set stamped directly onto the panel. And finally, my little odd one out, the green wreath. I added some red gems and backed it onto a Samba red panel that had also been splattered with the shimmer spray. And another cut down strip sentiment from May Your Days Be Merry and Bright. So happy Canada Mandala Snowflake Day! I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the different ways you can use these stencils. Now it's time to hop to the next video. I've put the link in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time!